Hi guys, Harbs and Narbs here. Today we're going to be talking about Sarevok and Irenicus in the context of Baldur's Gate 3. Now, I'll be honest, I think if we see them, it won't be in any solid form, and by that I mean I think we might see plenty of references and nods to them, and maybe a potentially ghostly manifestation here and there, but I don't think they'll be properly coming back. After all, if you're a writer, you want to create your own wonderful and weird villains, not bring back old ones, and as much as I like them both, I certainly wouldn't want to see them come back in any official villain capacity. Sarevok already made a comeback in Throne of Baal, which could be argued as pure fan service, and to do that a second time would be taking it to another level. As for Irenicus, well, he kind of had his comeback in Siege of Dragonspear, but of course that was a prequel. And by the way, I still can't believe that they actually got David Warner to reprise his role in that. What a voice.
Have become all too apparent to you of late.
So, fan service aside, we'll be taking a look at some possible theories on how Sarevok and Irenicus could realistically make their way into Baldur's Gate 3, because we have already seen some minor references to the two in early access. Okay, let's go. Let's first off take a look at what happened to Sarevok at the end of Throne of Baal. In the years following his resurrection by Kharname, Sarevok never settled in any one place for long. In Burdusk, he is said to have routed an army of invading orcs, displaying such fearsome power and rage that terrified locals weren't sure whom to fear more.
Die!
In Westgate, he arrived as conqueror, brutally enforcing his will, only to mysteriously vanish months later. He acted like a man that did not know himself, and all the stories agreed that Sarevok was a tortured soul, balancing between life and death, never to achieve either. Eventually, he disappeared, said to have assaulted the abyss itself, or even taken his own life. In truth, he journeyed to Karatur to bury his one true love, the warrior Tomoko. He never returned, though the stories endure. There is no reference in other sources to these adventures that Sarevok may have had in Westgate or Karatur, and for those that don't remember Tomoko, she is Sarevok's lover in the first game, who eventually approaches the player character to seek assistance in turning Sarevok against his evil ways, although the request is ultimately futile, because when it becomes apparent that Sarevok won't turn from his path, we are again confronted by Tomoko in the Undercity, who has accepted Sarevok for what he is, and doesn't want us to kill him. We are forced to kill her or try to convince her to walk away. Given Sarevok's epilogue, it's likely that BioWare's canon version of what happened was that we had to kill her. Now in Throne of Baal, Sarevok is resurrected and comes back to join our party, where he is out of the running in the Ballspawn, as he no longer has Baal's essence, which logically you'd think would take his long life away too, but this isn't clear, and it's certainly common in the realms for powerful individuals to live well beyond their expected lifespan, particularly those with the will, strength, and knowledge of the strange oddities linked to the divine like Sarevok. Regarding Sarevok's personal effects, there is still great power within them, as we can come across this book in Baldur's Gate 3. There came to me a woman, whom I shall henceforth call R, greatly distraught at the unusual tempers of her husband, whom I shall henceforth call B. 3 months prior he'd suffered night sweats, crying out from sleep that he bore the mark of chaos. 2 months prior he'd taken to call himself by the name Sarevok. 1 month ago he'd speak of little else but the throne of which he is destined. I attended to be at the couple's farmhouse. He sat calmly at the table, an unknown book clutched to his chest. I detected no curse nor loathsome spirit upon him, nor the presence of magic. Yet upon shining the light of candle flame upon him, he raised the book high and exclaimed,
The deaths they shall bring shall awaken the Father, and through them he will rise.
I snatched the book from his hand and flung it into the hearth, where it burned not in red or yellow flame, but pure black. It left but a single scrap, reading, He foresaw his coming death, and seeded his essence across the land. B shivered and sighed, as if waking from nightmare. He had no memory of the book, nor the words he had spoken. Diagnosis: unspecified neurotic enthrallment. Treatment: herbal tincture of garlic and drace, sipped thrice daily until exhaustion lifts. Now, given the links the Dead Three have with the Cult of the Absolute, and therefore possibly with the Illithids, it's interesting that this doctor has diagnosed it as neurotic enthrallment, and part of me wonders whether this is symbolic of the relationship that the Dead Three now potentially have with the Absolute, and in turn, the Mind Flayers. The Mark of Chaos matches up to a line that is literally written in the diary from the first game, and Orlando's actual prophecy. The Lord of Murder shall perish, but in his doom he shall spawn a score of mortal progeny. Chaos will be sown from their passing. So at the time, this prophecy was obviously referring to the event that took place in the original games. Chaos will be sown from their passing is likely referring to the fact that Baal will return once they have passed. Perhaps it is also referring to the Iron Crisis, and then what was later reinterpreted by the writers of Throne of Baal to refer to the carnage that happened in Tethir between the 5 Ballspawn there. However, I could see another reinterpretation coming our way, as the Ballspawn saga didn't really end until Murder in Baldur's Gate, and arguably was continued even in Descent into Avernus, and therefore are the events in Baldur's Gate 3 the chaos that has been sown from their passing. If Baal does have something to do with the Illithid plot and the chaos that is happening across the Sword Coast, then it wouldn't be crazy to think this. Lorien have already described as what's happening across the Sword Coast as chaos in their own press release, with the Dead Three being the ones involved in the complot. However, chaos is obviously a pretty colloquial word when referring to war, so I'm not saying anyone should actually take that as proof. But I'm also not saying that this theory would necessarily be a good thing, as I'm not super into rehashing older stories to fit into newer ones. What I can foresee happening is that we will come across similar items associated with Sarevok, most likely his sword and armour. The sword we can find at the start of Baldur's Gate 2, and it is called the Sword of Chaos, always following the same theme, and it's this which I could see making an appearance in Baldur's Gate 3, an artifact related to the former Big Bad of the first game. So, given that Baal is back and the Dead Three clearly have something to do with the cult, with the Dead Three cultists being a very active part of the city of Baldur's Gate in BG3's prequel Descent into Avernus, I could imagine that Sarevok's legacy and his discovery of an old Baal temple under the city, with the murder and chaos that he wrought during his brief tenure as a higher up in the Iron Throne, he could be seen as somewhat of a legend to Baalists. In Descent into Avernus, we can see this line. Sarevok, a Ballspawn and member of the Iron Throne Merchants Guild, sought to spark war with the Nation of Arm and become the new Lord of Murder. Another Ballspawn, aided by powerful allies, thwarted Sarevok's plan and brought stability, if not peace, to Baldur's Gate once more. Yet Baal and his faithful have menaced the city ever since. This kind of sounds like it was Sarevok that triggered the revival of Baal's cult in the city, even if he wasn't actually directly responsible for Baal's reincarnation. Okay, so we should probably talk about Minsc and Boo's Journal of Villainy, but you should be warned that there is very little to indicate that this is canon. I've linked the Forgotten Realms wiki analysis below of the book and a video that I myself made on it. It isn't an official Wizards of the Coast product, but it was published by them on the DMs Guild, and was written by James Olin, one of the lead designers on the original Baldur's Gate games, who actually now works for a subsidiary of Wizards of the Coast. So it could be safe to assume that James might be in the know on certain things, and Sven has said that he's spoken to people who worked on the originals. Anyway, please take this not just with a pinch of salt, but an entire mountain of it. With his prodigious strength, his legendary skill in battle, and the Sword of Chaos, a life-stealing enchanted blade, Sarevok became one of the most famous mercenaries in Faerun. Yet his many accomplishments brought him no joy. He felt no thrill at victory in battle, no delight in the routing of his enemies. The power he accumulated was bitter as ashes on his tongue, and he became a man haunted by his former life. The realization that no earthly achievements could ever compare to what he once almost had. Immortality and godhood left him broken and empty. Sarevok plunged into a deep despair. To numb his pain, he indulged in every vice imaginable, squandering his wealth and health on alcohol and drugs. While his divine heritage slowed his aging, it did not stop it entirely, and after decades of self-abuse, he was eventually reduced to an old man, begging in the streets of Baldur's Gate. This was how his father, Baal, the reborn god of murder, found him. But even though it was dimmed, Baal recognized his own divine spark in the pathetic old man, and he sensed Sarevok still had potential. Baal recruited him to become the high priest of his fledgling clergy, giving Sarevok new purpose and another chance to become an agent of death and destruction. One of the main contradictory parts of this is that it talks of Sarevok still having his divine spark, but in Throne of Baal he says that he is out of the running, having lost it. What we do know, however, from Descent into Avernus is that there are Dead 3 cultists running around the city, murdering people, and their influence over the cult of the Absolute is clear, as I've said before. So with the Dead 3 on the rise again, could it be that Sarevok, with his extended life, is in fact the head of Baal's new clergy? Well, I honestly hope not, as that would be a complete character shift from Throne of Baal, and personally I think Sarevok's redemption arc is far more fitting for the saga. Jonolith Irenicus, one of the greatest villains in RPG history, and a voice to match. Irenicus was the main bad guy in Baldur's Gate 2, a deeply troubled elf who was banished from Suldanesala after he tried to drain the Tree of Life of its power in order to elevate himself to divinity. He was stripped of his elvenhood and left to wander with his sibling Bodhi. With their lifespan greatly reduced, they sought other means of extending it, along with their now fledgling power. Bodhi sought vampirism, whilst Irenicus, also known as the Shattered One, hunted for divine blood, and it is this that connected his story with that of the Ballspawn, specifically our character, whose soul Irenicus took as his own. Now, we obviously defeat Irenicus at the climax of Baldur's Gate 2. We beat him first in the elven city of Suldanesala, where we are all then transported to something which can't easily be defined. The game makes out that we are in hell. There are challenges associated with the Abrahamic 7 deadly sins, but then this door here is referred to as an abyssal door, and there are demons that come to fight for Irenicus, whom are associated with the abyss. This is because it is actually a kind of pocket plane, linked to the Children of Baal. It is strikingly similar to Baal's pocket plane that we have access to in Throne of Baal, and there are the Tears of Baal present in the challenges there. Not only this, but Irenicus says it merely mirrors the soul we now share. However, Baal's home, when he was alive, was located on Gehenna, which is not in the Hells. The confusion of what this place was and where it was has been a subject of debate for some years. However, it isn't super important. What is important is what happened to Irenicus after we defeated him here. Due to the way souls and the afterlife change from edition to edition, it's probably a safe bet to go off what is defined in 5th edition, even if Baldur's Gate 2 used 2nd edition rules. I could see Irenicus fitting into the category of the false, who are mortals that failed to serve their gods or betrayed the commitments to their former faith, which is exactly what John did against the Seldarine. In the Sword Coast's Adventurer's Guide, the following is written regarding the false. The truly false and faithless are mortared into the wall of the faithless, the great barrier that bounds the city of the dead, where their souls slowly dissolve and begin to become part of the stuff of the wall itself. The meaning behind dying in this place could be defined in several different ways. However, I'm positive that Larian will define it better in Baldur's Gate 3. There is a book we can come across in early access where the author is investigating the Ballspawn crisis. The book follows the original games in order, with the first interview of an anonymous person in Candlekeep focused on Gorian's ward and Imoen. The second interview touches on the Iron Crisis from the perspective of an Armenian mercenary. The third interview is with a vampire who blames what can be assumed to be Gorian's ward and his party for turning his mistress to ashes. He then curses Irenicus. The fourth interview is with a Saradush merchant who speaks of a battle between the 5 in Tethir, and the final one is with a Flaming Fist who refuses to answer questions about a murder of a Ballspawn. Therefore, the interviews follow the sequence of the games and one D&D adventure: Baldur's Gate 1, Baldur's Gate 2, Throne of Baal, and Murder in Baldur's Gate. Whoever this author is, they are clearly interested in getting to the bottom of things. Now, the idea of Jon being part of the False would likely contradict the end to Baldur's Gate 2, where Irenicus is seen being pulled into a lake of lava by these creatures, implying that he truly is trapped in hell, or a place that certainly seems hellish. However, Irenicus also tells us before our final battle that to die in this place is to cease to exist, which itself kind of contradicts what happens in this cutscene here, because he dies and is then transported here, still existing in some manner. Again, there are contradictory things happening all over the place, especially when we factor in how death changes in D&D, with 5th edition clearly stating that one who dies goes to the fugue plane unless they've made a deal with a devil. In 4th edition, some souls traversed through the Shadowfell first, and in AD&D, lawful evil souls automatically went to hell even if they hadn't made a deal with a devil. Now, I don't want to see Irenicus back in the sense that he's back physically in the world, but I could envision it being quite cool if he was some kind of Red Skull-like figure who was cursed to assist others in the afterlife. He's in a unique situation where he was stripped of his elvenhood and then died sort of soulless. Larian could get creative with this if they chose to bring him back in some fashion, and the Forgotten Realms is a perfect place to do this. Bringing back old characters can be a cheap ploy at fan service if done incorrectly, but a subtle nod, or where Irenicus is now or where he ended up, could actually work. Again, I'm going to show you what's written about Irenicus in Minsc and Boo's Journal of Villainy, but I must reiterate that you shouldn't take what is written in here as fact. Jon sought to draw the divine spark out of Abdul and take it for himself, but Abdul escaped imprisonment and eventually hunted down and killed Jon, bringing his existence to a seemingly ignominious end. But that was not to be Jon's final fate. Due to a pact with the dark powers of the Shadowfell, Jon and Bodhi were drawn into a dark reflection of the treetop city in the domain of Dread. Trapped and unable to escape the prison of his own making, Jon is still able to inflict misery on the elves of Soldan Esalar with the help of his sister and their loyal followers. Yes, this is Jon Irenicus, and he has become a lich in the Shadowfell. Now, personally, I think this reintroduction of Irenicus doesn't justify itself at all. Okay, he's trapped in the Shadowfell, but he's not exactly a shadow of his former self. He's extremely powerful, able to inflict pain upon the elves of Soldan Esalar, and we defeated him at the end of Baldur's Gate 2, in what I would define as a far more definitive defeat than what happened to Sarevok in the first game, given that Irenicus himself says that he will cease to exist. Anyway, whether we see Irenicus or Sarevok in some form is a big mystery. Here's hoping that we see a fair few references to them, but I don't want to see them in any significant context of the game. I like the direction where Larian's going with their own villains and their own mysteries, and I think to rehash old villains would damage the endings of Baldur's Gate 1 and Baldur's Gate 2. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down below, and I'll see you next time. Bye!